Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to cover how to use the lookup component inside of a screen flow. This is a really tricky component, and once you understand the pieces of it, it makes it a lot simpler. So I have a screen flow open here, and we're just going to get started by opening up a screen. If you want to follow along in your own environment, feel free to do so. But what this component will do is it will allow you to let a user who's filling out your flow or doing your flow to pick a record in Salesforce from a lookup component. And so you'll see over here on the left we have the lookup component, and I'm going to click it once and add it to the screen. And this is really useful anytime you want to have a user select a particular record or search the Salesforce database and then choose a record and then have the flow work on it later. And it's really confusing the first time you work with it. So the key fields to be aware of are over here on the right, and they are these four fields that have the little red asterisk next to them, indicating that they're required. And so we're going to walk through each of these step by step because they're important to understand. And then I'll give you an example of a lookup component working, and I'll show you how to use that to update something about that record later on. So let's take it from the very top here, and you'll see that the first field we have to fill in is called the API name. And this is just the name. I'm hovering over the help text. This is just the name for the screen component inside this automation. And so you don't really have to call this anything in particular. You could just call it lookup component. Personally, I like to put the name of the object in there. So in this flow, we'll make this an account lookup because accounts are in basically every Salesforce environment. This doesn't really affect anything, so you can name this really whatever you want. This would be the least important, I think, of the four different options. The second field here is called field API name, and it works in tandem with the fourth field, object API name. And this is really the heart of understanding the lookup component. So what's confusing about the lookup component is you think that you may have to specify a field inside your flow or an object inside your flow, and that's not what you're doing. What the lookup component is doing is it's looking inside of Salesforce to find an existing relationship, an existing lookup field, and then it's using that field that already exists somewhere in Salesforce in order to emulate or mirror that relationship inside of your flow. So that's a bit confusing, but you could imagine on the contact record in Salesforce, there's already a field called account. There's already a lookup from the contact to the account. And so what we need to do in the lookup component and what we're going to specify in the field API name is the name of an existing field anywhere in Salesforce on any object that is linking to the object that you want to show in the lookup. So for example, in the field API name, if I type in account ID, and then in the object API name, if I type in contact, Salesforce will understand that there is a field on the contact object that's already called account ID, and then it can use that existing field as a way to recreate that same lookup relationship inside of your flow. And again, there may be nothing to do with contacts in your flow at all, and we're not going to update any contacts, because we've set it up this way. We're really just telling Salesforce, hey, there's something else you can reference in order to create this sort of lookup component relationship inside the flow, so go look there. And so now that we have those two fields filled in, we need to fill in the last field, and this is just the label on the component itself that end users will see inside of your flow. And so in this case, we're looking up accounts, but if I just typed in the word accounts here, you'll see that the component renders because we've filled in all four of the important fields, and then our label accounts shows up right there. And so you could really call that anything. You could say pick an account, and this is what the end user sees when the flow loads. So that's the basics of the lookup component. The only other kind of input that I would call your attention to over here on the right is this required value, and you can set that to true or false if you want the user to be required to pick an account or pick a record from your lookup component. So again, if you put in the value true here, you'll see that the little red asterisk appears on the lookup component, and if you leave it blank or if you specify false, you'll see that that red asterisk goes away. So we've now configured this lookup component. I'm going to press done. We'll save this real quick, and then I'll do a debug so you can just see that it works. Then if you keep watching, I'll give you more examples of different lookups you can do. So at any rate, I've debugged the screen flow. You'll see that our lookup shows here, and you'll see that a list of recent accounts shows up. So Burlington Textiles is there, and if we type in other accounts like Salesforce or whatever it is in your environment, those records will show there. So let's close this out and let's kind of practice a few more of these scenarios. I'm going to open this up, and I'll click on the lookup component again. And if you'll forgive me for a moment, I'm going to move an image onto the screen here, which is actually a cheat sheet with objects that you might want to show in Salesforce. So for example, if you wanted to show the lead object, you would use the field API name of lead ID and the object API name of campaign member. And again, this is not the only way to set up the lookup component, but what the lookup component does is it looks for an existing lookup field somewhere in Salesforce, anywhere in Salesforce, and it says, hey, I know how that works, so I can do the same thing here in the flow. And again, your flow may not be related to anything that your object reference is for. So you may be looking up the campaign member object to kind of get this lead lookup to work, even though your flow has nothing at all to do with campaign members. And so the object API name, the object that you're referencing may have nothing to do with your flow. And that's what's really confusing about it. It's like you have to kind of put those two pieces together. But once you understand that you're just emulating an existing relationship, it gets a lot easier. So we already did an account example, and you can see that I used the account ID field and on the contact object because I wanted to show accounts. If we wanted to show leads, we could use the campaign member object and the lead ID field. If we wanted to show contacts, we could also use the campaign member object and use the contact ID field. And there's a bunch more examples here. If you want me to email you this cheat sheet, I'm going to put a link in the description. And if you drop your email on the page, I'll send this to you so you have it. You can also just take a screenshot here, whatever works best for you. So let's continue with an example that's really common. Oftentimes when you're doing a lookup component, you'll want to show a list of users to pick from. And you can see I have that here on the cheat sheet. And we want to show users. And so the field API name we're going to use is created by ID because that's a lookup and it's actually on every object in Salesforce. So we can really just pick anything and we'll be able to show users. So now that we've looked at the cheat sheet, I'm going to move this off the page and we'll reconfigure our lookup component to show users based on kind of what I just showed. So again, the API name is just the name of the component inside of the screen flow. It doesn't really impact anything, so we could change that to be user lookup. The field API name, this is the name of a field in Salesforce that looks up to the records you want to show. And so in Salesforce, the created by ID always has the name of a user in there, and it's technically a lookup field to a user. And then this field API name always works in tandem with the object API name. Now, because the contact object has a created by ID lookup field on it, every object does, the component renders. And so we can change this from pick an account to pick a user, and we'll see that it renders. And so if we were to change this to, I guess it wouldn't work for a user because there's always this field here. But the key takeaway is that we need a lookup field in particular that points to the records we're trying to look up, and we have to specify the object that it's on. So let's maybe change this again, just to give another example. We'll make this a contact lookup component, and then I'll show you how to take the selection here and do an update on it, for example. So the field API name to get a contact to show would be contact ID, and the object would just be a campaign member. That's a native standard object in Salesforce that has that relationship, so we're referencing it here. And then we'll just say pick a contact. And we'll press done. And we'll press save. And so let's say that you have the user picking a contact record and you want to, for some reason, change the name of the contact record. So what you can do is in this, if we're changing a name, we're doing an update. So we could add an update records to the canvas here. And we can say update contact name. And what we'll do is we'll select specify conditions to identify records and then set the fields individually. And in this case, we're going to be updating the record that our user chose in the lookup screen. So we'll press contact. And this is the key distinction or the crucial thing to know is that when we are looking up contact records, we'll say that the ID of the contact that we want to update equals, and then we are going to dynamically reference the screen component. And so this is where the API name of the lookup component in the screen is helpful, because you can see here that we have the contact lookup component as an option in our screen components section. And if I click on this once, you'll see that the record ID is an option. And so I can click on that again, and then what this update records will do is it will say, hey, I'm going to go update the contact record where the ID of the contact is the same as the record ID that the user chose in the screen. That's exactly what we want, because we want to update the same record that the user chose. And so in this example, I'm just going to hard code a name in there, but you could obviously, put in other fields on your screen and then use those to kind of do this update. But here I'll just change the name to something static like Bob Apples. And so I'll press save here and we can debug this and just show how it works, and then we'll end the video. So I'll press debug, and actually first what I'll do is I'll just go find a contact in Salesforce just so you can see. So we have a contact here, Andy Young. So you'll see that name here. I'll just open him up. So Andy Young is here. And what we can do now is we can go back to our debug and press run. And if I look for a contact, I'll type in Andy Young. He was already there because I just looked at him in the UI, but we can pick him here. And because our flow is just hard-coded to change whoever we pick, whatever contact we pick, it's hard-coded to change the name to Bob Apples. When I press next here, the flow will run and will update the first and last name unless it hits like a validation rule or something. So I'm going to press next. And you see no errors, everything ran through. For those of you that are curious, you'll see down here in the bottom right, we have our update records where it changed the first and last name. And now if I go to the Andy Young contact record and refresh, we'll see that the name is Bob Apples instead. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comments. And once again, I will leave a link in the description where you can put in your email and I will send you the cheat sheet that I showed earlier in the video. Thanks so much.